My name is Emily. I'm 22 years old, and 3 days ago, I woke up in a hospital bed with absolutely no memory of who I was or how I got there. The first face I saw when I opened my eyes should have been comforting. It was my mother's. Instead, when I whispered, "Mom," hoping for reassurance, she looked at me with cold, tired eyes and said, "Well, at least the accident didn't make you any less worthless than you already were. I want to know, are you watching this from your bedroom, your living room, or maybe during your lunch break? Wherever you are, please hit that subscribe button because this story gets darker before it gets better, and I need you with me on this journey." The sterile smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils as I tried to process her words. My head throbbed with a pain that seemed to echo from somewhere deep inside my skull. The bandages wrapped around my forehead felt tight, restrictive, like they were holding more than just my wounds together. They were holding my very identity in place. "I don't understand," I managed to whisper, my throat dry and scratchy. "What happened to me?" My mother, Patricia, as I learned from the nurse who walked in moments later, adjusted her worn leather purse on her shoulder. She was probably in her late 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a messy bun and lines around her eyes that spoke of years of disappointment rather than laughter. "Car accident," she said matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing the weather. "You were driving drunk again. Crashed into a tree on Highway 85 outside Millfield. Lucky you didn't kill anyone else." The word "again" hit me like a physical blow. Had I been an alcoholic? The thought terrified me more than the blank space where my memories should have been. I searched Patricia's face for any hint of maternal warmth, any sign that deep down she cared about my well-being, but found only exhaustion and what looked like resignation. Dr. Martinez, a kind-faced woman in her 30s with warm brown eyes, entered the room carrying a clipboard. She smiled at me, the first genuine smile I'd received, and sat down in the chair beside my bed. "Emily, how are you feeling? Any flashes of memory coming back?" I shook my head, immediately regretting the movement as pain shot through my temples. "Nothing. It's like I'm looking at a blank wall where my life should be." "That's completely normal with retrograde amnesia," Dr. Martinez explained, her voice gentle and professional. "The brain sometimes protects itself from trauma by blocking access to memories. They might come back gradually, or they might not come back at all," Patricia finished, and I caught something in her tone. Was it hope? The next few hours were a blur of medical tests, paperwork, and stilted conversations with Patricia. I learned basic facts about myself. I lived in a small apartment in downtown Millfield, worked part-time at a local diner called Mickey's, and apparently had a history of making poor life choices, according to my mother. But it was what she didn't tell me that haunted me most. When I asked about my father, her jaw tightened. "Gone. Has been since you were 12. When I asked about friends, she shrugged. "You never were good at keeping people around." And when I asked about happy memories, childhood stories, anything that might help me understand who I was, she simply said, "There's not much worth remembering." That night, as Patricia prepared to leave, I felt a desperation I couldn't name. Despite her coldness, she was the only connection I had to my past life. "Mom, will you come back tomorrow?" She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. For a moment, I thought I saw her shoulders soften. Then she turned back to me with that same tired expression. "I'll be here when they discharge you. Someone has to deal with the paperwork." She hesitated, then added, "Try to get some sleep, Emily. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do with you." As her footsteps faded down the hospital corridor, I stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of person I had been that my own mother couldn't summon an ounce of compassion for me in my most vulnerable moment. The rain that had started during visiting hours now pelted against my window, each drop like a question I couldn't answer. Who was I? What had I done to deserve such coldness? And most terrifyingly, was she right about me? The nurse who came to check on me before her shift ended was a young woman named Sarah with kind eyes and a gentle manner that reminded me of Dr. Martinez. "Your mother seems tired," she said carefully as she adjusted my IV. "Is that what you call it?" I replied, surprised by the bitterness in my own voice. Sarah looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Emily, sometimes when people are hurting, they hurt others. It doesn't make it right, but it might help to remember that everyone's carrying something. As she left me alone with my thoughts, I realized that regardless of who I had been before the accident, I had a choice about who I wanted to become. The blank slate that terrified me might actually be a gift, a chance to start over, to be better than whoever I was before. But first, I had to survive whatever was waiting for me outside these hospital walls. The ride from the hospital to my apartment was conducted in complete silence, broken only by the rhythmic thump of Patricia's ancient Honda hitting potholes on Millfield's poorly maintained roads. I pressed my face to the passenger window, hoping something, anything, about the passing scenery would trigger a memory. The downtown area looked tired, with several storefronts boarded up and others showing their age through peeling paint and faded signs. "That's where you work?" Patricia said, without emotion, pointing to a small diner with a neon sign that flickered intermittently. Mickey's looked like it had seen better days, probably sometime in the 1980s. "Worked," she corrected herself. "I called your boss yesterday. He said don't bother coming back." The words stung, even though I couldn't remember caring about the job. "Did he say why?" "Same reason you lost the last 3 jobs, showing up late, calling in sick, attitude problems." She turned into a narrow alley behind a 3-story brick building that looked like it had been converted from something industrial decades ago. "This is it. Home sweet home." My apartment was on the 2nd floor, accessed by an external metal staircase that creaked ominously under our weight. Patricia produced a set of keys from her purse. Apparently, she'd retrieved them from the hospital, along with my other belongings. The door opened to reveal a studio apartment that immediately made my chest tighten with anxiety I couldn't explain. The space was small, maybe 400 square feet, with a Murphy bed that was currently folded down and unmade. Empty beer bottles lined the windowsill, and the kitchenette sink was full of dirty dishes that had developed their own ecosystem of mold. "Jesus, Emily," Patricia muttered, surveying the mess. "You really outdid yourself this time." But I was focused on something else. Photographs, or rather, the complete absence of them. The walls were bare except for a few thumbtack holes where pictures had once hung. No family photos, no snapshots with friends, nothing to suggest that anyone had ever mattered to the person who lived here. I walked slowly through the space, opening drawers and cabinets, searching for clues about my former self. What I found painted a disturbing picture. Unpaid bills stuffed into a shoebox, several empty bottles of cheap vodka hidden behind winter coats, and prescription bottles with various doctors' names: Xanax, Adderall, Ambien, some with dates going back years. Was I really that bad?" I asked Patricia, holding up one of the pill bottles. She was standing by the window, looking out at the alley below. "You were an addict, Emily. Pills, alcohol, whatever you could get your hands on. Started when you were about 16. Why?" The question came out smaller than I intended. For the first time since I'd met her, Patricia's expression shifted to something that might have been pain. "Your father left us when you were 12. He just walked out one day, said he couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. You took it hard, blamed yourself. I tried to help, but..." She trailed off, and I waited for her to continue. When she didn't, I pressed gently. "But what?" "But I was working 2 jobs trying to keep us afloat, and you were angry all the time. The drugs made you easier to deal with at first. By the time I realized how bad it had gotten, you were already gone, living on the streets, crashing with whatever loser would take you in." Her voice had taken on that familiar flat tone. "I tried to help you get clean 3 times. Each time, you'd steal something from me and disappear again." The weight of this revelation settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I was a thief, an addict, someone who had repeatedly betrayed the person who tried to help me most. I continued my exploration of the apartment, each discovery more depressing than the last. In a drawer beside the bed, I found a collection of what appeared to be goodbye letters, all written in my own handwriting, based on the signature but never sent. They were addressed to different people. "Dear Mom, dear Dad, dear Sarah from work, dear anyone who might care." I picked up the one addressed to my mother and began to read. "Mom, I know I've disappointed you more times than either of us can count. I know you probably wish I'd never been born, and honestly, most days I wish the same thing. I'm sorry for stealing your jewelry to buy pills. I'm sorry for embarrassing you at Cousin Lisa's wedding. I'm sorry for being the daughter who only calls when she needs money. I don't know how to be better, and I'm tired of trying. Maybe everyone would be happier if I just... The letter ended there, unfinished. Emily? Patricia's voice sounded strangely strained. I looked up to find her watching me with an expression I couldn't read. I found these, I said, holding up the letters. Did you know I wrote them? She shook her head, but something in her eyes suggested otherwise. You were always dramatic, always threatening to hurt yourself when you didn't get your way. This doesn't sound like manipulation, I said, scanning the letter again. This sounds like someone in real pain. Patricia's laugh was sharp and bitter. Pain? You want to know about pain? Try working 16-hour days to pay for your daughter's rehab, only to have her steal your grandmother's wedding ring the day she gets out. Try explaining to your neighbors why the police are at your door again because your daughter got arrested for possession. Try... She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together as if physically holding back the words. The silence stretched between us, heavy with years of disappointment and resentment. I looked around the apartment again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just the home of an addict, it was the home of someone who had given up entirely. Someone who had isolated themselves so completely that their own mother saw them as nothing more than a burden. But as I stood there, holding those unfinished letters, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the complete absence of memory making it easier, or maybe it was the shock of seeing my life from the outside. But I realized something crucial. I didn't have to be that person anymore. I want to change, I said quietly. Patricia turned from the window, her expression skeptical. You've said that before. I know, but this time is different. How? You can't even remember who you are. I met her eyes, and for the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I felt something like determination. Maybe that's exactly why this time can be different. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you needed a complete fresh start? Drop a comment below and let me know. And while you're at it, hit that like button if you're rooting for me to turn my life around. 3 days after leaving the hospital, I was sitting in the waiting room of Millfield Community Health Center, my palms sweating as I filled out intake forms for their addiction counseling program. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of industrial-strength coffee mixed with antiseptic made my stomach churn. I'd found a pamphlet for the program tucked inside one of those unfinished letters, along with an appointment card dated 2 weeks before my accident. An appointment I'd apparently never kept. Emily Carter? A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and warm brown eyes appeared in the doorway. I'm Diana Walsh. I've been looking forward to meeting you. As I followed her down a narrow hallway lined with motivational posters, Diana continued, I have to admit, I was surprised when you called. After you missed our last appointment, I wasn't sure we'd hear from you again. Her office was small but comfortable, with 2 armchairs facing each other and a window that looked out onto a small garden. Diana settled into one chair and gestured for me to take the other. So, she said, opening a file folder, let's start with how you're feeling about being here. Honestly? Terrified, I admitted. I can't remember anything about my life before the accident, but everyone keeps telling me I was this terrible person, an addict, a thief, someone who hurt everyone who tried to help me. I don't know if I'm here because I want to get better or because I'm afraid of who I apparently was. Diana nodded thoughtfully. Can I share something with you? When you called to make that first appointment, the one you missed, you sounded different than you do now. Different how? Defeated. Hopeless. Like you were going through the motions because someone else wanted you to, not because you believed change was possible. She leaned forward slightly. Today, you sound scared, but there's something else. Determination, maybe? Hope? The word hope felt foreign in my mouth. I keep finding these letters I wrote but never sent. They're dark, really dark. Was I suicidal? Diana consulted her notes. You mentioned having thoughts of self-harm during our phone conversation. You said you felt like everyone would be better off without you. She looked up at me. Do you feel that way now? I considered the question carefully. No. I mean, I'm confused and scared, but I don't want to die. I want to figure out who I can become. That's significant, Emily. Trauma can sometimes create unexpected opportunities for healing. Your brain protecting you from traumatic memories might actually be giving you space to build new, healthier thought patterns. Over the next hour, Diana helped me understand the basics of addiction and trauma. She explained how my father leaving might have created a wound that I'd tried to medicate with substances, how shame and self-loathing could become a cycle that fed itself. The person everyone's describing to you, the addict, the thief, that person was in tremendous pain, Diana said. Addiction is often a symptom of deeper trauma. You weren't born broken, Emily. You learned to cope in the only way that felt available to you at the time. When I left Diana's office, I had a workbook tucked under my arm and my next appointment scheduled for the following week. But more importantly, I had something I hadn't possessed since waking up in that hospital bed. A sense that maybe I wasn't inherently worthless. That afternoon, I decided to visit Mickey's diner. I needed to understand what kind of employee I'd been, and maybe find someone who knew me before the accident. The diner was busier than it had looked from the outside, with truckers, construction workers, and local families filling the worn vinyl booths. The smell of grease and coffee was oddly comforting, and I found myself wondering if I'd enjoyed working here. "Can I help you?" The waitress behind the counter was probably in her 30s, with bleached blonde hair and tired eyes that looked familiar. "Hi, I'm Emily Carter. I used to work here?" Her expression immediately shifted to wariness. "Emily? Jesus, we heard about your accident. How are you? Are you okay?" "I'm recovering. I have amnesia. I can't remember anything from before the accident. I was hoping someone could tell me about me." The waitress, her name tag read Karen, glanced around nervously. "Look, honey, I don't want to speak ill of someone who's been through what you have, but..." "Please," I said. "I need to know. Everyone else just tells me I was terrible, but no one explains why." Karen sighed and gestured for me to sit at the counter. "You want coffee?" I nodded, and she poured me a cup from a pot that looked like it had been brewing for hours. "You started here about 8 months ago," Karen began. "At first you were actually pretty good. Fast learner, showed up on time, customers liked you. But then, you started showing up high, not drunk. We might have looked the other way for that, but high on pills. Your pupils would be like pinpricks, and you'd move like you were underwater. Mickey, that's the owner. He tried to work with you, gave you warnings, offered to help you get into treatment." My chest tightened. "What happened?" "You stole from the register. Twice. The first time, Mickey didn't press charges because you paid it back, said your mom loaned you the money. But the second time," Karen shook her head, "it was rent money, Emily. Mickey's got kids to feed. He had to let you go. How much did I steal?" $300 total. The number felt like a punch to the gut. I thought about Patricia's tired clothes, her worn purse, the way she'd talked about working multiple jobs. Had she paid back money I'd stolen? "There's something else," Karen said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "The night before your accident, you came in here around closing time. You were in bad shape, crying, talking about how everyone hated you, how you'd ruined everything. What did you do?" "I gave you coffee and pie, listened to you talk. You kept saying you wanted to disappear, that maybe everyone would be better off if you just drove your car off a bridge somewhere." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "I should have called someone, should have made sure you got home safe. Instead, I let you leave, and then the next morning, we heard about the accident." The weight of this revelation settled over me like a heavy blanket. Had my accident really been an accident? Or had the broken, desperate person I used to be finally acted on those dark thoughts I'd found in my letters? "Karen," I said carefully, "do you think I crashed my car on purpose?" She was quiet for a long time, wiping down the counter with mechanical precision. Finally, she looked up at me. "I don't know, honey. But I know you were hurting real bad, and I know you felt like nobody cared whether you lived or died." As I walked home through the gray afternoon, Karen's words echoed in my mind. Had I tried to kill myself? Was my amnesia protecting me from the memory of that decision? And if so, what did it mean that I'd survived? That evening, I called Patricia. When she answered, her voice had that familiar tone of weary resignation. "Emily, what's wrong now?" Mom, did you pay back the money I stole from Mickey's? There was a long pause. Why are you asking? Because I need to know. I need to understand what I put you through. Another pause, then a sigh. Yes, I took money from my retirement account to cover what you stole. It was either that or let Mickey press charges. Why? I asked. Why would you protect someone you think is worthless? The silence stretched so long, I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Because you're still my daughter, Emily. Even when you make it impossible to love you, you're still my daughter. After she hung up, I sat in my small apartment surrounded by the evidence of my former life's failures. But for the first time since waking up in that hospital, I didn't feel completely alone. Patricia's words, grudging and complicated as they were, contained something I hadn't expected. Love, buried under years of disappointment and pain, but still there. I picked up my workbook from Diana and began reading the first chapter, Understanding Your Worth Beyond Your Mistakes. As I read about self-compassion and the difference between shame and guilt, I realized that whatever had happened in that car on Highway 85, I'd been given an unexpected gift, a second chance. The question now was whether I was brave enough to take it. A week into my recovery, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find my father. Patricia had mentioned he left when I was 12, but she'd been vague about the details. If I was going to understand who I'd become and why, I needed to know about the event that had apparently started my downward spiral. I spent the morning at the Millfield Public Library, a small brick building that smelled like old books and industrial carpet. The librarian, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, helped me navigate the computer system to search for public records. "What exactly are you looking for, dear?" she asked, adjusting her glasses as she showed me how to access the database. "Information about my father. He left when I was 12, but I don't know much beyond that." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "Sometimes the past holds answers we need for the future. Take your time and let me know if you need help." After 2 hours of searching, I found what I was looking for. A divorce filing from 12 years ago. Patricia Carter versus Michael Carter. The reason listed was irreconcilable differences, but attached to the filing was something that made my blood run cold, a restraining order. According to the court documents, Michael Carter had been ordered to stay away from Patricia and Emily Carter due to incidents of domestic violence and substance abuse. There were police reports attached, detailing calls to our house for domestic disturbances, including one where I had apparently called 911 myself. I printed the documents with shaking hands, my mind racing. Patricia had told me my father simply left because he couldn't handle responsibility. She hadn't mentioned that he'd been abusive or that I'd been the one to call for help. That afternoon, I confronted Patricia at her work, a small insurance office downtown where she worked as a claims processor. She looked surprised to see me walk through the glass doors, and her expression quickly shifted to concern when she saw the manila folder in my hands. "We need to talk," I said. She glanced around the office, where 2 other women were pretending not to listen. "Can this wait until I get home? I'm working." I found the court records. About Dad. Patricia's face went pale. She spoke quickly to her supervisor, then grabbed her purse and led me outside to a small park across the street. We sat on a bench under a maple tree whose leaves were just starting to turn autumn colors. "Why didn't you tell me he was abusive?" I asked, opening the folder. "Why did you let me think he just abandoned us?" Patricia stared at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. "Because I thought it would be easier for you to handle. You don't remember any of it, Emily. Why burden you with those memories? Because they're not just memories. They're the reason I became an addict." I pulled out one of the police reports. "This one says I called 911 when I was 11 because Dad was hitting you. Another one says he threatened to kill both of us if you tried to leave him." Tears were streaming down Patricia's face now, but she still wouldn't look at me. "You were so young. You shouldn't have had to see those things. Shouldn't have had to protect me. But I did see them. And then you told me he left because he couldn't handle responsibility, which made me think it was somehow my fault, that I was too much trouble to love. That's not what I meant, isn't it?" I pulled out another document. "Look at this. The final restraining order was issued after he showed up at my school and tried to take me. The report says I was found hiding in a bathroom, having a panic attack. Patricia finally looked up, her eyes red with tears. I was trying to protect you. After he was gone, you kept asking where Daddy was, why he didn't love us anymore. I thought it would hurt less if you believed he just couldn't stay. But that's not what happened. What happened was that a 12-year-old girl helped her mother escape an abusive relationship and then spent the next 10 years thinking she was unlovable because her father couldn't handle the responsibility of her. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching families push children on swings and throw balls for their dogs. Normal families, doing normal things, living lives that seemed impossibly simple compared to ours. There's more, Patricia said finally. Things I never told you, even before the accident. I waited, sensing that we were approaching something crucial. After your father left, you started having nightmares, panic attacks. You'd wake up screaming that someone was going to hurt me, that you had to protect me. I took you to a therapist, but what? But I couldn't afford to keep going. My insurance barely covered anything, and I was already working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. The therapist said you had PTSD, that you needed ongoing treatment, but I couldn't make it work. The pieces were starting to come together. A traumatized 12-year-old dealing with PTSD from witnessing domestic violence, left to cope without proper treatment. It wasn't hard to see how that child might turn to substances to quiet the anxiety and fear. When did I start using drugs? Patricia wiped her eyes with a tissue. Freshman year of high school. I found pills in your backpack, Xanax from some kid at school. When I confronted you about it, you said they were the only thing that made the scared feeling go away. What did you do? I flushed them down the toilet and grounded you for a month. I thought if I was stricter, if I monitored you more closely, I could keep you away from that stuff. She laughed bitterly. All I did was teach you to be sneakier about it. As we walked back to Patricia's office, I felt like I was seeing my life story clearly for the first time. I wasn't some inherently bad person who had chosen drugs and alcohol over family and responsibility. I was a traumatized child who had found the only coping mechanism available to her, and then spent a decade trapped in a cycle of addiction and shame. That evening, I called Diana and asked for an emergency session. I need to understand something, I told her, sitting in her comfortable office as rain pelted the windows. If I was self-medicating trauma, why does everyone treat me like I'm just a bad person who makes selfish choices? Diana leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. What did people say when you tried to explain your pain? I thought about Patricia's reactions, about the way she'd described my addiction as selfishness rather than illness. They said I was making excuses, that plenty of people have hard childhoods without becoming addicts. And how did that make you feel? Like there was something fundamentally wrong with me, like I was weak or bad or... I paused, recognizing the pattern. Like I was worthless. So you started believing it. And when you believe you're worthless, how do you treat yourself? The answer hit me like a physical blow. Like you're worthless. You stop caring about yourself, stop trying to get better, because what's the point? And what happens to your relationships when you stop caring about yourself? They fall apart. People get tired of trying to help someone who won't help themselves, so they start pulling away, which confirms that you really are worthless, which makes you use more to numb the pain. It's a cycle, Diana said gently. Trauma creates pain. Pain leads to self-medication. Self-medication creates problems. Problems create shame. Shame reinforces the original trauma. Breaking that cycle requires understanding where it started, which is exactly what you're doing now. As I walked home through the rain that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since waking up in that hospital bed. Compassion for my former self, the person who had stolen money and missed work and written those desperate, unfinished letters, hadn't been a monster. She'd been a wounded child in an adult's body, still trying to protect herself the only way she knew how. For the first time since my accident, I cried, not from frustration or fear, but from grief. Grief for the little girl who had called 911 to save her mother, for the teenager who had turned to pills to quiet her nightmares, for the young woman who had felt so worthless that driving into a tree had seemed like a reasonable solution. But as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I also felt something else. Determination. I couldn't change what had happened to that little girl, but I could choose what happened to the woman she'd become. The question was I strong enough to break a cycle that had been 10 years in the making? If you've ever felt trapped by your past, leave a comment below. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in our struggles makes all the difference. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We're getting to the turning point of this story, and I want you here for what comes next. 2 weeks after discovering the truth about my father, I was sitting in a circle of plastic chairs in the basement of St. Mark's Community Church, attending my first Narcotics Anonymous meeting. The room smelled like coffee and cleaning supplies, and inspirational posters with sayings like, "One day at a time," decorated the cinder block walls. Diana had suggested I try a support group, but I'd been resistant. The idea of sitting in a room full of strangers, admitting I was an addict when I couldn't even remember using drugs, felt overwhelming. What finally convinced me was a conversation with Patricia that had surprised us both. I'd gone to her apartment the night before, a small one-bedroom place that was neat but sparse, filled with furniture that had seen better decades. We'd been talking more since our conversation in the park, trying to rebuild something that had been broken long before my accident. "I want to go to an NA meeting," I told her as we sat at her small kitchen table, drinking tea from mismatched mugs. "Why?" she'd asked, but her tone was curious rather than dismissive. "Because I need to understand what I was going through, and I need to hear from people who've been where I was and found a way out." Patricia had been quiet for a long time, staring into her tea. Finally, she'd looked up at me. "I never understood it, you know. The addiction. I kept thinking if you just had more willpower, if you just tried harder. And now I think maybe I was part of the problem. Every time you tried to explain how you felt, I told you to stop making excuses. Every time you asked for help, I gave you ultimatums instead." Her voice had cracked slightly. "Maybe if I'd listened more, judged less." Which was how I found myself in that church basement, listening to a man named Robert share his story. He was probably in his 50s, with calloused hands and the weathered face of someone who worked construction. But his voice was gentle as he spoke. "I started using when I was 15, he said. "My dad used to beat the hell out of me, and the pills made it so I couldn't feel anything. By the time I was 25, I'd lost 3 jobs, been arrested twice, and my wife had left me. I spent the next 15 years convincing myself I was just a piece of shit who deserved everything bad that happened to me." Several people around the circle nodded in recognition, and I felt something loosen in my chest. This was familiar territory, even if I couldn't remember living it. "The thing nobody tells you about addiction," Robert continued, "is that it's not really about the drugs. It's about the pain the drugs are covering up. You can't get clean until you're willing to feel that pain and deal with it." When it came time for newcomers to introduce themselves, I found myself speaking before I'd consciously decided to. "Hi, I'm Emily, and I guess I'm an addict." The words felt strange in my mouth, but somehow right. "I was in a car accident a month ago and lost my memory. I can't remember using drugs, but I'm learning about the person I was, and I'm here because I don't want to be that person again." "Hi, Emily," the group responded in unison, and something about that simple acknowledgement made my eyes fill with tears. After the meeting, a woman named Grace approached me. She was probably in her 30s, with short red hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "I heard you mention memory loss," she said. "That must be incredibly disorienting." "It is. Everyone keeps telling me I was this terrible person, but I can't remember being her. Sometimes I wonder if it would be easier if I could just remember, you know?" Grace smiled sadly. "I used to think the same thing about my childhood. I was sexually abused by my stepfather from age 8 to 14, but I'd blocked most of it out. When the memories started coming back in therapy, I thought I wanted them gone again. But you know what I learned?" I shook my head. The memories weren't the problem. The shame I'd been carrying about the memories was the problem. Once I could remember what happened, I could finally understand that it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't broken or dirty or worthless. I was just hurt. Her words stayed with me as I walked home through the cool October evening. The leaves were changing colors now, and Millfield actually looked pretty in the golden light of late afternoon. For the first time since my accident, I felt like I was part of something, a community of people who understood what it meant to carry pain and fight to heal from it. That night, I did something I hadn't done since leaving the hospital. I called Patricia and asked if she wanted to have dinner together. "Dinner?" She sounded surprised. "Are you okay? Did something happen?" "I'm fine. I'd like to spend time with you, if you want to." There was a long pause. "I could make spaghetti. It was always your favorite when you were little." "I'd like that." Patricia's apartment felt different that evening, warmer somehow. She'd set the small table with actual placemats and napkins, and the smell of garlic and tomatoes filled the air. As we ate, we talked about small things, her job, the weather, a funny story she remembered about me as a child. "You were maybe 6 years old," she said, smiling at the memory. "You'd decided you wanted to be a veterinarian, so you started a hospital for stuffed animals in your closet. You'd wrap them in toilet paper bandages and feed them pretend medicine with a toy syringe. That sounds sweet." "You were sweet. Before everything went wrong, you were this incredibly empathetic little girl. You'd cry if you saw a dead bird on the sidewalk, bring home every stray cat in the neighborhood." Her smile faded slightly. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if your father had been different, if we'd been different." "Mom," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" She nodded. "When I was using drugs, when I was stealing and lying and disappointing you, did you ever think about what I was trying to escape from?" Patricia set down her fork and was quiet for a long time. "Honestly? No. I was so angry, so tired of dealing with crisis after crisis, that I stopped thinking about the why and focused on the what. You were stealing, so you were a thief. You were using drugs, so you were an addict. I never stopped to think about the fact that you were also a scared kid who'd watched her father terrorize her mother for years. I went to an NA meeting tonight. How was it? Hard, but good. There was this woman there, Grace, who told me something that made sense. She said the memories weren't the problem. The shame about the memories was the problem." Patricia looked confused. "What does that mean?" "I think it means that what happened to us when I was little, the abuse, the fear, the trauma, those things weren't our fault. But the shame we've both been carrying about them has been poisoning everything else." We talked until almost midnight that night, sharing memories Patricia had of my childhood, discussing what we'd both learned about trauma and addiction. For the first time since my accident, I felt like I was talking to my mother rather than a stranger who shared my DNA. The next few weeks fell into a new rhythm. I attended NA meetings 3 times a week, continued my sessions with Diana, and started volunteering at the animal shelter on weekends. Something about Grace's comment about my childhood love of animals had resonated with me. The work was simple but satisfying. Cleaning kennels, walking dogs, helping potential adopters find the right pet. It was at the shelter that I met James, a veterinarian who volunteered there on Saturdays. He was probably in his early 30s, with kind brown eyes and an easy smile that he shared liberally with both animals and humans. "You're new," he said one Saturday morning as I was cleaning out a kennel for a pit bull mix named Bruno. "About a month now. I'm Emily." "James, and this is Bruno, who's been waiting for a family for almost 6 months now." I looked at the dog, who was watching me with hopeful brown eyes. "Why so long? People see pit bull and assume he's aggressive, but Bruno's about as dangerous as a marshmallow. He just wants someone to love him." Something about the way James said it, without judgment, with only compassion for a creature who'd been written off by people who didn't understand him, made my chest tighten with emotion. "Can I ask you something?" I said, surprised by my own boldness. "Sure." "Do you think it's possible for someone to completely change? Like, if someone had made really bad choices, hurt people they cared about, do you think they could become a different person?" James was quiet for a moment, scratching Bruno behind the ears. "I think people can heal from almost anything if they're willing to do the work and they have the right support." "Why do you ask?" I found myself telling him about my accident, my amnesia, the person I was learning I'd been before. I expected judgment or pity, but James just listened with the same compassionate attention he gave to the animals in his care. "You know what I think?" he said when I finished. "I think you're incredibly brave." "Brave?" I'm a former drug addict who can't remember her own life. You're someone who lost everything, including your own memories, and chose to use that loss as an opportunity to rebuild rather than an excuse to give up. That takes courage. That afternoon, as I walked Bruno around the shelter's exercise yard, I realized something had shifted. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I wasn't just running away from the person I'd been. I was actively building toward the person I wanted to become. The old Emily had used drugs to escape pain. The new Emily was learning to sit with discomfort and work through it. The old Emily had pushed people away when they tried to help. The new Emily was building connections with Grace from NA, with Diana, with James, even with Patricia. But the real test came 3 days later, when I got a phone call that threatened to undo all the progress I'd made. "Emily, this is Mickey from the diner. I need to talk to you about something. Can you come in?" My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. Mickey had fired me for stealing. Why would he want to see me now? Had I done something else? Something I didn't know about? Was he going to press charges after all? As I walked toward the diner, every muscle in my body tensed with anxiety. The old Emily would have dealt with this feeling by getting high, by numbing herself until the fear went away. The new Emily took deep breaths, reminded herself that she had people who cared about her now, and kept walking. Whatever Mickey wanted to discuss, I would face it sober, present, and accountable, even if it destroyed everything I'd been building. But when I walked through those doors, what I found wasn't an angry boss threatening prosecution. It was something that would challenge me in a completely different way and force me to decide once and for all who I really wanted to be. Mickey was waiting for me at the back booth of the diner, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of permanent worry lines that come from running a small business for decades. When he saw me approach, he gestured for me to sit down. "Emily, you look different." "Different how?" He studied my face for a moment. "Healthier, I guess. Less—" he searched for the right word. "Less haunted." Karen appeared with a coffee cup for me, shooting me an encouraging smile before disappearing back to the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, using it to anchor myself in the moment. "Mickey, I need to apologize," I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. "That's actually why I asked you to come in. I've been thinking about our last conversation, the night before your accident." His expression grew serious. "You came in here talking about ending your life, Emily, and I let you walk out that door. You couldn't have known what would happen. Maybe not. But I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've seen enough broken people to recognize someone in crisis. I should have called someone, should have made sure you got help instead of just hoping you'd figure it out on your own." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You feel guilty about my accident?" "I feel responsible, which is why I want to offer you something." He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "Your job back. Full-time, with health benefits that include mental health coverage." I stared at the envelope without touching it. "Mickey, I stole from you. Twice. Yes, you did. And if you were the same person who stole from me, I wouldn't be having this conversation. But Karen tells me you've been coming to NA meetings, that you're in therapy. And the way you look now, you're not the same person who walked out of here 6 weeks ago." My hands were shaking as I picked up the envelope. Inside was an employment contract offering me a position as assistant manager with a salary that was nearly double what I'd been making before. "I can't accept this," I said, even though every practical part of my brain was screaming at me to take it. "It's not fair to your other employees. I haven't earned this." Mickey leaned back in the booth, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know what the old Emily would have done? She would have grabbed that contract and signed it without a second thought. She would have seen it as the universe finally giving her what she deserved. And what is the new Emily doing? She's proving exactly why I want to hire her." He took a sip of his coffee. "Emily, I'm not offering you this job out of pity or guilt. I'm offering it because I need someone who understands what it means to hit bottom and fight their way back up. Half my customers are truckers, construction workers, people dealing with their own struggles. I need someone who can look at a person having the worst day of their life and see them as human." I thought about Grace from NA. about how her simple acknowledgement of my pain had made me feel less alone. I thought about James at the animal shelter, seeing past Bruno's breed to his gentle heart. I thought about Diana, helping me understand that my addiction had been a symptom, not a character flaw. "There's one condition," Mickey continued. "You keep going to your meetings, keep going to therapy. The health insurance covers it, but you have to promise me you'll use it." "Why are you doing this?" Mickey was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the stream of people walking past. "Because 25 years ago, I was where you are now. Different drug, same desperation. And someone gave me a chance when I didn't deserve it. This diner? It saved my life, gave me purpose when I thought I was worthless." He turned back to me, his eyes serious. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Emily. I'm asking you to be honest. With me, with your customers, with yourself. Can you do that?" I looked down at the contract, then back at Mickey's weathered face. "I want to try. That's all anyone can do." I started work the following Monday, and it was harder than I'd expected. Not the job itself, taking orders, managing schedules, dealing with suppliers, but being around people who remembered the old Emily. Some customers were openly skeptical. Others watched me carefully for signs that I was using again. But there were also customers like Frank, a long-haul trucker who'd been coming to Mickey's for years. He was probably in his 50s, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen too much road. "You're Patricia's girl," he said during my second week, settling into his usual booth. "Heard about your accident. How you holding up?" "Taking it one day at a time." Frank nodded approvingly. "Smart approach. I've been sober 15 years myself. Started drinking when my wife died, nearly lost my truck, my license, everything that mattered." He stirred sugar into his coffee. "But you know what I learned? Rock bottom is just a foundation. Question is what you choose to build on it." What did you build?" "A life worth living. Not perfect, not fancy, but honest. And that's more than I had when I was drinking." 3 weeks into my new job, I got a call that tested everything I'd learned. It was from someone claiming to be my former dealer, a man who said his name was Tyler. "Emily? Heard you were back on your feet. I've got some pills that'll help with those headaches from your accident. Same price as before. And since we go way back." My hands were shaking as I held the phone. For just a moment, the idea was tempting. Not because I wanted to get high, but because I was tired. Tired of working so hard to be better. Tired of facing every day without the chemical buffer that had once made everything bearable. "Emily? You there?" "I'm here, and I'm not interested." "Come on, don't be like that. Everyone needs a little help sometimes." I said no. "Look, I know you've got money now, working at Mickey's again. I could meet you tonight." I hung up and immediately called Grace from NA. "I need to talk to someone," I said when she answered. "I just got a call from my old dealer, and I'm scared." "Where are you?" "At work. I'll be there in 10 minutes." Grace arrived wearing scrubs. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and slid into the booth across from me during my break. "Tell me what happened." I recounted the phone call, the moment of temptation, the fear that I was one bad day away from throwing away everything I'd built. "Do you want to use?" Grace asked directly. I thought about it honestly. "No, but I want to not use, if that makes sense. I want to not have to fight this feeling every time something gets hard." Grace smiled. "You know what that tells me? That you're exactly where you should be in your recovery. The fact that you called me instead of calling him back, the fact that you're here talking about it instead of hiding it, that's huge growth. It doesn't feel huge. It feels like I barely made the right choice. Emily, barely making the right choice is still making the right choice. And the more you do it, the easier it gets." That evening, I had dinner with Patricia again. It had become a weekly tradition, these quiet meals where we slowly rebuilt our relationship. I told her about Tyler's call, about my moment of temptation. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "For what? Almost screwing up?" "For calling Grace instead of calling him back. For being honest about struggling instead of pretending everything's fine." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. The old Emily would have made that call and then lied to everyone about it. The new Emily is learning to ask for help. As I walked home that night, I realized that recovery wasn't about becoming a different person. It was about becoming the person I'd always had the potential to be. The scared little girl who'd called 911 to protect her mother had grown into a woman who could protect herself. The teenager who'd felt worthless had learned that her worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions. The young woman who'd tried to numb her pain had discovered that feeling it fully was the only way to heal from it. 6 months after my accident, I was promoted to manager of Mickey's Diner. Patricia and I had started going to family therapy together, working through years of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. I'd been clean for as long as I could remember, which admittedly wasn't very long, but it was a start. And James, the veterinarian from the animal shelter, had asked me out on a date. "I should probably tell you," I said when he picked me up for dinner. "I have no idea what kind of person I am in a relationship. I can't remember ever being in one." He smiled, the same gentle expression I'd first noticed when he was talking about Bruno. "Then we'll figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations, just two people getting to know each other." As we walked into the restaurant, I caught my reflection in the window and barely recognized myself. Not because of any physical change, but because of the way I carried myself. The hunched shoulders were gone, replaced by something that looked almost like confidence. The hollow eyes had filled with something that might have been hope. I thought about the unfinished letters I'd found in my apartment. All those desperate words addressed to people who might care. I'd never sent those letters because I'd been convinced no one would want to hear from me. But I'd been wrong. Grace cared, Diana cared, Mickey cared, James cared. Even Patricia, in her complicated way, had always cared. The woman who'd driven her car into that tree on Highway 85 had believed she was worthless, that everyone would be better off without her. The woman walking into this restaurant 6 months later knew better. She knew that worth wasn't something you earned through perfect behavior or lost through mistakes. It was something you were born with, something that couldn't be taken away no matter how badly you'd hurt yourself or others. I'd lost my memories in that accident, but I'd found something more valuable, the knowledge that it's never too late to choose who you want to be. The past doesn't have to be a prison if you're brave enough to build something new. And as James held the door open for me, as Patricia's text wishing me a good evening lit up my phone, as I thought about the customers I'd serve tomorrow who were fighting their own battles, I realized that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is losing everything you thought you were, so you can discover everything you're capable of becoming. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear that change is possible. And remember, no matter how dark things get, tomorrow is always a chance to choose differently. Where are you watching this from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you believe in second chances.